So, in terms of what we're covering today, this is obviously quite a big topic, and I think it's something that we would probably do anyway. This is a kind of topic that the student room is a real expert in, and fantastic people like Grace, who build our communities. But more than ever, building a digital community and making sure that your presence in your community online is really, really strong it's essential. It's more important than ever, and not only does it impact kind of recruitment, but also, of course, teaching and the student experience when they're on campus, because hopefully students will be able to come onto campus in the autumn, which will be fantastic. And it's been great seeing lots of your university's comms coming out about the ways you're going to make that really accessible. Really fantastic to see. But that doesn't mean to say that it's going to be quite as in person as before, and certainly the power of a digital community is going to be really paramount moving forwards. So what we're going to cover is really kind of what creates a community in the first place, what is a community, and what makes them really, really strong. Also about understanding the audience and the members of a community, which is completely essential, and just again thinking about the kinds of questions you should be asking about this community and about that audience, and how it might differentiate from the other work that you do. Also the power of personality, and how maybe individuals or a group can make a massive difference, as well as you as either kind of moderators of community or the progenitors of it as an institution. And then finally, kind of covering off just reinforcing the common purpose. So the reason you're all together, and how you might be able to reinforce the values and the things that bring that community together. We'll finish off with a key takeaway summary, and then also a Q&A. So any questions you have, please, like I said, pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them either as we go through if it's pertinent, or bring them up at the end as a whole. So I've talked about the fact that TSR and Student Room is kind of one of the best places to talk about community, and kind of we're real experts in that. But let me just put that into numbers for you. So we have every month more than 8 million users using the Student Room, which is an enormous group, absolutely. And that transpires into over 2.5 million posts every year. So not only do we have an awful lot of individual users coming to spend time on the site, many of those are there to interact and talk to one another, but many of them are just there to be lurkers and engage in the community in a passive way. All of these posts are across more than 250 forums across the site. So there's a forum for every university in the UK. There's forums for all the different subject areas at university. There's forums for general interest, driving a car, money, finance, art, news and current affairs. Kind of anything that is of remotely of interest for a young person, there's a forum for it on the site, which is kind of really essential. And ultimately, we just have a real loyal and large usership that kind of a really, really strong central base, as well as that larger lurker audience as well. And so, yeah, there's lots of different kind of layers to all communities. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're kind of talking about it, and in the best place to be able to kind of share some expertise with you. But let's just talk about what creates a community. I'm just going to step back slightly and have a think about, what a community actually is. So a community can be just about proximity. So a community can be about where you live, if you're a little village or a city, and being part of the identity of that location, and making that location a lovely place to live, a lovely place to be, to work. For many people, it's about having a lovely place for your children to grow up. So a community can be all about proximity and location. It can also be about a common interest. So my husband is super into Arsenal. Loves it, and there are loads of places online where the Arsenal community are really strong. So that comes out in things like this photo is a recording of the Arsecast, and the Arsenal fans out there will know this is like a massive kind of content generator, and lots of people will listen to that. There's lots of different ways that all of those people that love Arsenal can come together and really, I guess, have lots of rituals to what they think will help Arsenal win, and to talk about it, talk about what's going on there, and be part of that together. And then it could also just be, this is a photo from a sitcom called Community, which is about misfit students at a community college in the USA. So it can also just be about wanting to better yourself, improve yourself, and be kind of at university or at college, and moving forwards. Kind of similarly, workplace communities kind of falls into that as well. So there's lots and lots of different ways that communities may come about, but ultimately the thing that binds them all, the things that makes communities really, really strong, is not just a common interest, but a real common aspiration. So whether it's about making the place that you live better, whether it's about encouraging your team and having rituals to make sure that your team wins and having the aspiration of your team winning or becoming, champions of stuff. Can you tell that I'm not a football fan myself? Or whether it's about bettering yourself and wanting to help yourself and the other members of your community better themselves at university through education and through work. Whilst a community can just exist because of a common interest, ultimately what makes things really, really powerful is having a group of people who have a common aspiration. So, on the student room, I'm going to hand over to Grace here because we have a really, really interesting framework about what we do to make sure that our communities are large and strong.
Thanks, Lorna. So we're going to talk you through kind of a little bit of a strategy that the community management is almost built on, essentially, and that we try and adhere to TSR. Obviously, there are different things that come in according to what your purpose is, what it is that you're trying to achieve. But this is a good framework to start off with, making a digital community somewhere that people want to be and somewhere that people are happy in and it feels like a really healthy environment. So to start off with, the first thing is that the community normally come to you or find your community because they're looking for a purpose or specific content. So for example, for the student room, we quite often have a large presence come through from Google search, looking for a specific thing to do with universities, A-levels, GCSEs, exams. They find us through searching for that specific content, and once they find that content, what we try to do is make sure that there is other content that they might be interested in put in front of their face. And by doing that, we are building interest and trust through this engagement. So we're making sure that whatever they're looking for, we try and anticipate that beforehand and put that there for them so that we build their interest. And by building that interest, as I said, we're building in that trust and that engagement as well. We're not just passively putting something in front of their face. We're trying to make sure that we are putting something there which they can engage with and we can then engage with them. The next stage we're looking at is connecting and communicating with others. So through that engagement, you are connecting with those people. You're wanting to keep them there. You're wanting to make sure that they get what they need. And by that, they are then telling you how they would like the community to be, which is exactly what you want. Feedback in a community is so important. Otherwise, it's kind of you just putting things out into the void and nobody giving you any feedback on what they would actually like to help improve the community. You constantly want to be trying to improve and make that community a really healthy place to be. So that connection and communication with the members is so important, and they can then communicate with each other as well. And that is a stage that is kind of the sweet spot, then when it's not just you communicating with them, but also they're communicating with each other. And that peer-to-peer aspect of it within a community is really, really important. You don't just want the leaders kind of putting things down. You want people to be talking amongst themselves and then taking that up to the members who are kind of managing that community. And making sure that they're aware of how everything wants to be. And by doing that, you're building those strong relationships and a sense of belonging. So if you feel included, feel like this is a place where you want to be, you're listened to, you're heard, that is building up those strong relationships within the community. You want to come back. You found somewhere that you feel at home, and you found somewhere that is giving you what you want as well through content and through that connection. And then leading on into the next stage, which is they then start to create good, valuable and helpful content. And by that stage, you're kind of really hitting your kind of a peak stride here. It's not just you creating the content, the members themselves are taking it upon themselves to get involved and create that content as well, whether that's just conversations and reviews, that's content, or whether that's kind of articles, videos, however it comes about. Just even the conversations like on TSR, that is the content that we have that people are really interested in. They want to have that conversation, see that conversation, read other people's opinions, and that content then helps support those people that are again funneling in from Google, from social, however it is that you are kind of bring your community in back into that content that they are looking for. And so it kind of creates a lovely flywheel there where, you know, there people are funneling in and coming round and going almost full circle to support their community.
Absolutely. I think there's also a kind of key point, which is clearly this is a circle that's going round and round. And we've kind of talked about how really, really strong communities are about people who have a common aspiration. But whilst an aspiration might imply a kind of an end goal, the aspiration really isn't finite. So if we're thinking particularly about, you know, university communities and thinking about that more abstractly, now, obviously, many of you listening now are primarily about student recruitment, but the community and digital community you're creating, if you like, I'm sure you'll notice that across your social media platforms and across LinkedIn, for instance, it's primarily alumni that are really, really engaged. And so that doesn't, like, the kind of feeling of aspiration doesn't end. Whilst they might have achieved their degree, they still, like, the aspiration of being part of this amazing community, your fantastic university, that doesn't go away. And those people can also help reinforce everything else here. So kind of having students there, you know, alumni that have had that great experience that can connect and communicate with prospective students is also super, super powerful and can kind of bring those together.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something, excuse me, that is really key. On the student room, we have members who have been around for, you know, 10, 15 years, who are still there. They are long past being students, but they come back and they found a place where they feel that support, that connection. And that they're wanted as well, and that they're still, you know, that we find their contributions really valuable, and that then feeds into new people coming in and reaping the benefits from their expertise. So.
Yeah, and also really wanting to help the other young people being in the position that they were in. So, you know, not only like they're not aspirational just for themselves, but also have aspirations for the other audience, the younger audience that they can integrate with. And I think, you know, this kind of the beehive analogy is probably really, really done, but I think it's still really relevant to think about communities as really humming, as buzzing, and wanting to have them really, really active, but also understanding that they may also break down into smaller groups. So we've just kind of thought about prospective students versus current students versus alumni, and just like a beehive, there's lots of different parts of a community, and when it's large enough, that's where you end up having those subgroups, and subgroups is a really fantastic sign of a really healthy community, because not only have they found real common purpose, real common aspiration with you, but they're also then finding those niches through there as well. So everything's driving up towards the thing that brings you all together, whether it's university or a career, or maybe you all live in the same accommodation if we have accommodation providers in the audience as well. But also that they have their own little niches as part of that. So not only are they really excited about coming to your university, but they also really have kind of strong aspirations for a specific political career, or maybe they're doing a business management degree and really want to go into you know, managing some kind of specific company, for instance. But all of those things are really, really, really positive, and yet still the kind of the flywheel, that constant turning circle still applies. So that's really kind of both what a community is and what makes community really hum and really successful. So we'll just kind of go through some short key takeaways from that section. So we've kind of said this again and again, a community isn't just about common interests, it's about a feeling of aspiration, about wanting to make yourself better, the world better, your colleagues and peers better.
Yeah, and every aspect of what makes a community, kind of, as I said, with the flywheel, feeds into the other parts. So the most important thing is that, like, different areas are looked after in different ways, and that we know that each different section has a knock-on impact on the other section. If, for example, you're not building the trust that you need to in a section of the flywheel, then you won't be able to feed into the next section, and it cuts that loop off. So it's really important that each different section is managed in a different way, and that everything is fed back and made sure that everyone knows what the common purpose and goal is.
Absolutely. And then just finally, larger communities will develop sub-communities, and that's a really healthy sign of a really healthy community. I mean, if you think about it, you know, obviously we think about the student room and all the forums. So we have, as Grace talked about early on in terms of her role, the site itself is broken into different areas. So the point of the student room as one big whole is to bring young people together and help them become the best versions of themselves. Then we also have a whole area about study help, and that's all about just helping young people that want to develop their own study and get better grades, particularly at school, get those guys better. But within that, there's specific subjects, and again, like things like maths and physics, they have such a unique little ecosystem as part of that. So all of these things are fantastic. And as you get more and more niche, not only does it really support those niche areas, but it also supports the whole community, which is fantastic. So that's kind of really an introduction to communities as a whole. And so the next section is just really about understanding the audience, understanding the members of your community. And I'm going to pass over to Grace to talk about this in a lot more detail.
Thank you. So the main thing is to start thinking about who are your audience. So an audience, what do they have in common? It might just be that they are interested in attending your university, but it might be that if you're thinking about the wider picture, your audience is not just prospective applicants, but it's current students, alumni, academics. There's a whole kind of varied ecosystem within a university community, which is massive, and each of them have different things that they are looking for, but they are coming to you because you are unique. You offer that particular thing that they are looking for, and that's what they want. And you have to start thinking about that in a variety of different ways. As I said at the bottom of this, you know, a community member can be a customer, like a prospective applicant, but they aren't synonymous. So you have to think about how your community is focusing in on what it is that they are looking for, that you can provide them, and how you are unique from other communities out there. There is a community for absolutely everything. As Lorna has mentioned with the Arsenal community, I mean, there is one of our previous CSR community managers, the head of community, I think he used to manage a steps community, so for lovers of steps. So I think there is a community for everything, and you've got to find that kind of uniqueness about your community that makes people want to come and flock to you. One thing that is important when you are trying to understand your audience is what is the reason for these people to stick around, or what is it that you can provide them that means they want to come to you and come back to you as well. It's not just about having a look at the community and what's going on and then leaving again. You want them to get involved as much as possible, and to do that, it's about consistency, and it's about making sure that you are providing a really constant approach to how you're managing your community, and also how you're getting that content out, and how you are looking after the audience that are there. And you need to work that out before you start building your community. You've got to have that kind of main purpose, that goal that you're all striving for, and then community members can feed into that goal. Something that is worthwhile thinking about is reworking personas, and I'll just pass over to Lorna to talk about this a little bit more, simply because this is her area of expertise. But you have to have a broader motivation for people to join the community, and it's different from different marketing personas, isn't it?
Absolutely. So thinking about personas, I guess any kind of exercise in which you're developing personas is broadly about even with if at university, it's about a purchase plan, I think. And I know this is really, thinking about universities and thinking about students as customers it's a bit of a leap, isn't it? You know, I think we all feel that in lots and lots of ways. But those personas are often about kind of purchase plans. Now, when we're thinking about those broader motivations, the persona and the kind of the consideration there is not necessarily about that person as a customer, kind of it's about a community member and thinking about them as part of what you're delivering. So that community might be about, just again, proximity. They might enjoy, it might be somebody in your local community that really enjoys some of the facilities you have on site because you've got a fantastic sports facility, or maybe you have a theatre on site. But it can also be things like parents and teachers. And so when we're thinking about communities, it has to be not just about people making purchases with you, coming to you as university, but also thinking about those aspirations. It's not just about the degree. It's not just about having the tool at the gym, but it's about kind of, like I said, about kind of that aspiration piece around how they are going to benefit and be better versions of themselves as part of being in that community with you, which kind of leads on to that piece that Grace has said again. So community members, they can be customers, but they aren't necessarily always the same thing. I guess a prime example of this may also be things like the Nike Run Club. Nike Run Club is an app. It's really useful. Now, the primary point of Nike Run Club, of course, for Nike is to get people to buy their gear. Of course, they want people to buy their trainers. They want people to buy their shorts, leggings, t-shirts, of course. Now, there are some people that have the app, use the app, engage in the community, share their top scores, top speeds, take part in challenges, and they never buy a Nike product. And that's okay. That's okay, because ultimately what you want is somebody that is going to have a great time, recommend it to other people. And the same applies to your community. So if you have somebody that's in your community that's spending time on your Instagram and your TikTok, seeing your content, just maybe they walk through your campus. Ultimately, you want that person is a member of your community and there's opportunity there to engage in lots of different ways. But ultimately, they are an influencer. They're part of your community and are not a customer. So that's kind of thinking again about broadening those personas, about the different ways that actually lots and lots of people may engage with your institution. Cool. So moving on slightly then. The other point I think is also just in terms of understanding.
Lorna might have just frozen there.
Ooh.
One second. Okay. I think whilst Marissa, our co-host, tries to get her back, I'll kind of go on to this next slide here and talk a little bit more about when you're building a digital community, what it is that you are looking for, and what it is about that community that you need to understand. So within a community,
Can you hear me?
Hello. Sorry,
Hi.
1 second. I think Lorna's just having some internet connections, and as it's hosted on her laptop, it might just be that we're having a bit of trouble with getting everybody set up.
Okay, I think.
1 sec.
Hello, I'm also just popping in to help you all out. It's Marissa.
Okay, Sarah says that they can hear me, so I'm going to carry on if that's okay. I think maybe we'll work it out. Internet problems, yay! Okay, so just kind of following on from what we were talking about there in terms of community and customer. So the other thing around understanding your audience is having a think not only about kind of who they are, but also how they communicate. Now, what I mean when I say this is to say that you don't have to speak like your audience, but you do have to understand how they communicate. And what that means is, if anyone that's spent any time on anywhere online, really, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or on the student room, there is a vernacular for young people, and the vernacular is super different. And I think what's really interesting about the UK in particular, I'm going to get very technical here. So in the UK, so not just accents, but didacts vary within a 3-mile radius. We're a really, really ancient, or very, very old country. We have vast variety because all the people that have invaded us. So think about the fact that in the UK, our vernacular changes within 3 miles, and different words mean different things within a 3-mile radius. When it comes to young people online, that's really, really similar. So it can be the same community communicating in different ways on different platforms. So thinking about, your audience, the way they talk on Instagram is going to be different to the way they talk on TikTok, is going to be different to the way they talk on Facebook, and is going to be different to the way they talk on the student room as well. And because all of those different places have slightly different purposes, but still bring that whole community together. A prime example, so I think, Grace, you've got a really good example of like when you want to rep somebody.
Yeah, so
yeah, but understanding the way that your audience communicate without necessarily having to communicate in their way.
Yeah, definitely. So on the student room, there is several different things that people say. People use different emojis to convey an emotion. But there's one thing in particular that you might see quite often on the student room is somebody writing prison, or PRSON, when talking to another member. So you might just see literally just a comment that just says PRSON. You're just thinking, what is this? What does this mean? But you'll see other people kind of getting involved and enjoying that comment. Basically, that means please rep some other member, and it's a message that somebody gets when they try to give someone a rep or a like. And because of our system of controlling the way that people give rep, so that nobody gets like thousands and thousands of rep points from one post and one user, people are only allowed to rep a certain user a certain amount of times over a course of a week, for example. So when they can't do that, and they've been told that they've repped that member too many times, they'll then instead write PRSOM to say thank you for their post and thank you for the content that they've given. So you might see that on TSR. And when I first came to TSR, I had to Google it actually, because I couldn't work out what was going on. Actually, there's a whole thread about exactly what it means. Yeah, it's just a great kind of fun vernacular for the particular community that they know, they understand, and they like knowing that. It's that kind of like, oh, I know what that means, and I'm part of the community if I use it. So it's a great example of understanding the vernacular, but the amount of, I don't often use it as a member of the community myself. I rarely ever say it, but it's nice to know, and you feel like you're part of the club when you're involved in that conversation by understanding what it means.
Absolutely. So I think you'll have similar examples yourself. You're all part of communities. You may all have inside jokes just in your small community of friends, maybe, or perhaps you're part of a massive fan club, and again, you have little words that mean something to you and not to others. And again, like I said, you don't have to speak in their way, but it's really important to understand them so that you can understand the vibe, the tone, how that conversation is going. Another example as well, thinking about this community in particular. So on Reddit, which is kind of like, it seems to be spanning Reddit and TSR a little bit. There's a thing called bread. So when students receive all of their offers, or an offer that they were really, really excited about in terms of their top 5 universities they'd applied to, they'll post a screenshot of their bread, which is a screenshot of UCAS showcasing their offer. Can't tell you where it comes from, but it took me a little while to work that out. And I think now that I know it, I'm like, I'm going to upvote that little bread. That looks amazing. Obviously, I'm not going to talk my own bread. I'm not applying to universities, but like I said, really important to understand how your students, how your community are communicating without necessarily having to communicate in the same way. So understanding your audience, understanding community, of course, is really essential. Let's just recap on those key things that you really need to remember. So first off, persona exercises focused on community rather than product can really support your ability to create content that connects. I guess this gets back again to thinking about your community as something slightly different to customers. So often, again, thinking about like personas, maybe about the degrees they take up, the reason they want to study with you, rather than thinking about that broader picture, about the aspiration that's associated with your institution as a whole, or about what you're offering as part of a community. So broadening that out a little bit and just making sure that the content you're creating as part of that for that community really, really connects to their aspirations and motivations. Second point.
Yeah, so remembering that community members are not necessarily just your customers, but they can all act as influencers, lurkers, and contributors is really important. So somebody is a member of your community, even if they don't necessarily post, they're still maybe coming back really regularly. It might just be that they haven't gotten around to kind of posting yet. They don't feel that they have something to say yet. They may just feel that they want to get involved by reading everything and understanding everything. They don't feel confident enough to be a part of it, but they're still part of your community. They still are coming back, and that's something that's really interesting to consider when viewing a community, is that there is not just the people that are regular contributors, influencers within your community, but also the people that come back and have a look around but still want to have a say in how that community is run and what it is that's going on there. So it's about, on the student room, if you've ever come along to one of our official rep training seminars, then you'll hear us say several times, like, remember the lurker, remember that everything you write is read by thousands of other people. And that's something to consider here, definitely, is that you need to understand your different key players within your community, and not all of them are the ones that you can see.
Absolutely. And just the last point, where I think this is something we started kind of out really early on in this section, which is about working out the attributes of your community members that they have in common that's not about necessarily kind of your product. And I think this is where there are organic communities that exist regardless of your institution. That's fantastic. But when it comes to you being part of a community that's about you as an institution, or you as a company, you as a brand, it's really important to understand what binds those people outside of the product. So a prime example of that, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. So fan clubs. Lady Gaga has an enormous community. They are they're passionate about her as a person. Now, the thing that binds them, if you look at it from really, really far away, is that they love Lady Gaga and her music. Lovely, nice. I want her merch. I want to go to her shows. But digging a little bit deeper and thinking about the other things that bind them are really about being misfits, being maybe misunderstood. There's a huge LGBT part of about her community. And so the thing that binds them is actually wanting to be seen and heard and accepted for who they are. So understanding those motivations, you can see the difference between the product, which is Lady Gaga herself and her music, and the wider motivations, and understanding the common attributes that they have as a community as a whole that bring them together and really bind them. And they'll be, similarly to your institution, you'll have similar things going on for you guys as well. Okay, so that actually brings us really well on to our next section, which is the power of personality. Again, I'm going to hand over to Grace at this point.
Thanks, Lorna. So with the power of personality, how can a university or an institution have a personality, especially when there are so many different personalities that make up your institution? It's difficult to find your personality sometimes, especially when you have particular brand guidelines that you may be adhering to. But using those and adding in a human element is really important. So you might be wanting to follow a certain specific style of engaging with people, but adding that human aspect to it makes you have a personality, something different, and you're not just the University of X. So you are, Grace, who works at the University of X, Lorna, who works at the University of X, and you're all of those people together, and you have that human aspect. And that's what a lot of students are looking for as well. Sometimes institutions are big, scary brick buildings. They don't have that kind of accessibility that they're looking for and that they need when making decisions about their future. They want to feel like that place is accessible. And so when building a digital community where people are asking all the questions that they normally ask before kind of going along to something like an open day or an applicant day, things like that, they want to see that you're a human being, and that it doesn't feel scary to go along and be a bigger part of their community, and see whether that's something that they would like to spend more time within. And to do that, you need to be both engaging and to engage with them. So when I spoke earlier about the flywheel, about creating content and then leading on to that sweet spot where the communities themselves start creating content, that's the kind of area that we want to be focusing in on. So at the beginning of building a digital community, it can be hard. You need to be doing that kind of consistent messaging, building up everything that you want to be putting out there, getting that content out there, and engaging with every single person that is commenting or engaging with your content, and then encouraging them to go off and do that themselves. Allowing that self-sustainability and allowing them to go and do that as well is key. So you might want to feel like you kind of like have a hold on it, and you want to kind of push it all together and keep it under your control. And actually the sign of a really healthy community is a community that's allowed to self-sustain. And by self-sustain, I don't mean as in you drop off and kind of let them do their thing. It needs to be at a certain stage where you feel like the community are talking amongst themselves and you're just a contributing member to that community and supporting them before you kind of let them go off and do that. If you don't feel you're at that stage yet, it's kind of a gut feeling with this. So quite often you can see in posting styles, how people are doing and what they're thinking. Quite a lot of it is about human intuition with the community. And once you've gotten to that sweet spot and allowing them to be self-sustainable and showing that you are a human as well and you want them to go and do that, that builds your community in a really fantastic way and shows that you are accessible, and anyone who wants to see that or is coming and having a look at your community, however it may be forming, can see that you're a human and letting people do what they need to do and being supportive and being there for them, and that's really important in building up a community. And if we go on to the next stage, we're looking at some of the risks that can come up to a community. So as I said, we want to be building, we want to be getting the content out there, we want to be allowing people to build their own content and to contribute their own content. But by doing that, as you may have experienced before, if you're managing any kind of social media, there are trolls disingenuous and inauthentic people that are coming on and have an agenda sometimes, or sometimes they're just disgruntled and they want to make it really known. And they want to kind of put out there things that may harm your community, and may cause people to question things. It's really difficult when that happens. It takes a lot of time to understand why people are doing that and what it is that they're trying to gain from it. And that's why an action plan is important when understanding the risks of a community. So like trolls, for example, that action plan will mean that you are providing a really consistent approach to your community, and that's something that's important. You don't want to be having an approach where one thing is left out, one thing isn't. You're replying to one person, but you're not replying to another person. You want to make sure that you're really consistent in the way that you're dealing with your community, so they feel like it's fair. And that trust element in the flywheel that I spoke about earlier is the element that could be compromised here, and that's something that is really important to consider when building up your action plan. You want to make sure that by somebody looking onto that conversation, they are understanding what you're doing and why you have that approach, and they don't see something different when they go on to another conversation that may be similar. So it's a difficult one to consider, but we have an example here that may be helpful for you. And something that we come across really regularly on the student room. So it may be that they just post and say, oh, for example, I'm having a real difficulty going onto this forum, what's going on? Or for here, example, a troll post about how they've had an awful time at your institution, how much they hated it, and have used really strong language to describe that. And it's seen by a lot of other members of the community, who then maybe start posting worries and their experiences underneath, and the conversation starts to turn sour and starting to turn a little bit kind of off where you would normally want your conversations to be going, a positive and healthy conversation. And potentially, you're introducing things that maybe are not beneficial to the conversation, and they're not constructive to the conversation either. There's a place for constructive criticism, constructive information being put out there. But this conversation, in this example, you're looking at it turning sour and it's turning non-constructive. So the first thing to think about is, where is this coming from and how do I respond to this? So if you go into where this is coming from, clearly they've had a grievance that they want to air. So something hasn't been solved, something hasn't been looked after for them. So there's an unfinished business here that they're looking to resolve in some way. And for them, that means potentially coming on and posting something which they know is going to get traction, they know is going to get views, and they know people are then going to start questioning. So they're doing it, because they haven't had that grievance heard. And how do you respond to that, especially when it's in a digital environment? You don't necessarily know their situation, and sometimes, for example, you may even not know who that person is. They may be posting anonymously or under a different alias. You just don't know. How do you help them? So the first thing that you need to be doing is, don't ignore or delete these conversations. It's really important that you don't just brush things under the carpet or try and ignore it. As I said, like, conversations can turn sour quite quickly if there's traction built up within this. And the first thing you want to do is kind of nip this straight away. You want to be responding with kindness and understanding of an individual opinion. So you might kind of feel that wall come up originally when you first see that, kind of like, oh, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. I need to immediately come in and say, no, you're wrong. That's not true. And actually, sometimes it's about the wording that you choose and trying to show that you're hearing them. They're coming originally here because they felt like they hadn't been heard, and you need to show that you're actually hearing them. So you can't take that experience away. You can't just block up and say, no, this is completely untrue. What you need to do is offer up how the facts and go back to your facts on this as much as possible. If you see something that you're not sure about and somebody has said that this has happened, try and introduce facts. Offer other experiences up that are more positive, that are from the community. If you have student ambassadors as well, they may have had a different experience. Say, oh, I'm really, sorry to hear that. If we can help in any way, please, send us a DM, for example, and we can look at this individual situation. However, here are some people that have had a really positive experience doing that course and with that situation, and here's how we want to showcase it. So you want to twist the conversation into something positive. Asking how you can support them and responding to anyone else that is worried shows that positivity. You're trying to turn it into something where you are actually going, hey, this is an awful experience, I'm sorry about that, but how can we turn this into a better experience for you? And that's something that's really key. You can also moderate where necessary. So for example, on the student room, we don't allow any kind of swearing, graphic language, or slander, anything like that. So we have a moderation policy and we make that really clear and visible on site, and anybody can see that moderation and community guideline policy, which is key for that trust element in the flywheel. You want to make sure that people understand what it is that they are getting into and what rules they have to follow as part of your community. So you can remove that language if that's not appropriate, but it might be, instead of taking the whole conversation down, you may edit the conversation and leave an edit note up saying, we've removed the language here, but we've kept the post up because we feel like it's important, that we don't hide anything. Or it may be that you need to lock a conversation when it doesn't kind of give any productivity anymore. So it might just turn into, a conversation where people are going, yeah, and not actually offering anything useful. And we at the student room, when that happens, we tend to close a conversation rather than take that down, because we still want people to feel like they are being heard and listened to, but that conversation isn't productive anymore. And we don't want people to contribute to that and it just turn into something which is, really muddying the waters. It's confusing. No one is gaining anything from it. So it's really difficult when it comes to trying to manage your risk here. But there are several different things that you can do, and building action plans like these are a great way of coming up with the solution that everyone can follow. It feels consistent. As I mentioned, consistency is key. And making moderation or community guidelines visible to that community so they understand what they're getting into is the best way to manage this from the beginning, because you can always refer back to them. And that's what we do at TSR. If anyone breaks the rules, we refer back to the community guidelines. We say they're here, they've been here for a long time. We show them to you when you first come on site. You know what you need to be doing. And this is to kind of bring it back into order a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge risks. With all of these things, the vast majority is super positive, but bad reviews, they happen. People being disgruntled, it does happen, and I think we've all had experiences of one bad experience and an amazing customer service has just turned it around for us completely. So just really important to think about those things, all the negatives as well as the positives. So super straightforward, clear, easy takeaways for this section, really. So just communicate as humans. As an institution, I think it's really easy to fall into very formal language because you don't want to, of course you don't want to get yourself in a sticky situation. And of course, universities in particular are super risk averse. Totally understand that. But you are a person talking to other people, and so communicate in that way. That means using contractions. That might mean using GIFs and emojis. That is acceptable and expected. And exactly what students want from you as well. They want to be able to connect with you and know that they're going to have a good time with you.
Yeah, and having a clear action plan for the rest of your community, as I mentioned, is key. And it can be as simple as just a few guidelines, as I mentioned, clear, visible. Everyone understands what it is that they need to do when they come down and become a part of your community.
And just kind of on that point as well, so you can be risk averse without being silent. And I think, this must have been a really difficult situation lately, so less about maybe digital communities, but just about communicating with your students. The more you can communicate with students around in positive ways is fantastic. And, the risk averse people may be like, well, let's just hold off completely until we know what the answer is. And that actually isn't necessarily always the best shout. I kind of talked about that last week in our last session, but yeah, absolutely, you can be risk averse without being silent. And I think kind of this wraps up the power of personality. This is where if you bring your the kind of brand expression of your institution to the fore, if you can make it really human, make it really accessible, that kind of the risks are less likely to scare you in the same way. The things that come back negatively are less likely to scare you because you're just communicating as humans with other humans, which is really powerful. Okay, we are just on to our last section. I think we'll spend a little less time on this, and then we'll get to your questions. We've had a few questions already, which is great. I'm really happy to answer these bits. If you do have anything else that you'd like to ask, anything you haven't kind of covered yet, even if we might cover it in the thing now, but this is the essential thing you want to know, pop it in the chat and we'll just make sure we're covering it off for you. Okay, so finally then, reinforcing the common purpose.
Yeah, so as I've mentioned throughout the presentation, as Lorna's mentioned as well, it's like, what do you bring to them? So the creation of good content is key. You're probably already doing this. You've probably already got some amazing content out there that you're already kind of pushing out, and you want to be making it as visible as possible. That's kind of basics. Official advice and support is fantastic for them, because quite often they're coming to your community because they want that kind of official advice or the expert advice that they're looking for. It's about making it as visible as possible, and that's a really key part of community management, is putting something that may not be that visible in front of someone's face when they need it at the time that they need it the most. And that's how you can build your community in the best way possible. And then we also, again, keep talking about the kind of peer-to-peer aspect of it. What do they get from each other? And that's how you reinforce your common purpose and interest, because a healthy community, as I've mentioned, is a self-sustaining community. They want to share their experience, they want to talk to each other and support each other, and that's when you know that you really reach that great spot where the community are looking after each other and you're supporting them from the outside.
Okay, so when it comes to providing a kind of value exchange, thinking about reinforcing that common value. So some of that can literally be a value exchange, and some of that, like Grace just talked about, some great content provides enormous value. They get value from one another. But there are some other kind of examples that I just want to kind of share with you, just to think about the idea of value exchange, the idea of the kind of ways you can reinforce that common purpose. Just bringing it out of our sector, thinking about learning from other places. So one really, I guess, obvious example is Patreon. So I don't know if any of you know about Patreon. So basically Patreon is a place where content creators or artists or people that are part of the big community. So like for instance, there's a great podcast that I love called All Killer No Filler. Recommend it to everybody. It's really funny. And basically they create this content for free for us. There's loads of us that kind of chat about it online. It's all about serial killers, slightly off piece there, but it's fantastic content, and they do, and the people that create it do it completely for free. And so one way of them, they're providing a really clear value exchange is ultimately like the audience gives money through Patreon and they get exclusive content back. Now, that's not necessarily completely appropriate for everybody, but if you have really fantastic content, if there's ways that you're creating great content and there's more, but it costs a lot of money and you want to kind of give your community something back, but there's an exchange there, this is the most obvious way. They give you some money and you give them some content back, and those people can feel that they're part of this, again, exclusive club. Another example is again, going back to the Lady Gaga example. So Lady Gaga has her community of fans that she calls Little Monsters. Now, I kind of talked about the power that they have before and what brings them together, that the fact that they, people that are really, 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 the community for Lady Gaga, they're really into it, feel very, maybe that they feel like misfits and unseen, not listened to. And Lady Gaga is really fantastic across many social platforms at responding to her fans and engaging with them. And the value exchange there is for her audience to feel seen and heard. And that's really important for them. And so that's what she gives them back. Obviously there's like, shows and new music and stuff and everything, of course, just like you guys have degrees and accommodation and great societies. But this is a lovely way that she makes sure that her fans feel seen and heard. Another example, I can't believe I've gone for 2 pop stars here, but I think they're really, really good examples of thinking about that wider value exchange, which directly responds to what the audience is looking for and wants and values as part of being, in this community. And Taylor Swift. feel very embarrassed sharing this, but nevertheless, I think it's a really, really good example of a great value exchange for a community of fans that absolutely love her. This community are fierce about her. They love her so much. And if you go back a few years, she launched an album called 1989, and the thing that she did then as part of the launch was invite her superfans for a sleepover at her house. Now, the big pull for Taylor Swift, maybe slightly different to Lady Gaga, is actually about lots of particularly young women who just want to be her best friend. She feels she's the girl next door. She feels very accessible, and then she makes herself accessible by inviting them to her home. Now, it's not everybody, but what it does for that audience is like, oh my God, I could be her best friend. She could invite me to her house in the future. For that group, for that fan base, for that community, there is no better value exchange. There is no better value that can be provided than the opportunity to potentially meet her and make her your best friend. Now, there's every institution, every community, we've talked about this, very, very, very unique, but these are just 3 examples that are quite different, but just do provide that kind of point of value exchange. I'm just going to quickly go to Adam's question in the Q&A, so we can talk about this later, but I think it's really pertinent right now as we talk about value exchange. So Adam says, do you or how do you incentivize community members, points or prizes, etc.? So Grace, you're probably best placed to talk about that, but yeah, we have rep.
Yeah, so rep is kind of a big deal within our community for kind of really engaged members. So when you provide a helpful answer, a good answer, other members of the community will rep you. So it's similar to liking something on social media, and within that rep, you can then build up gems, they're called. And each individual gem means that you're seen in a kind of different light within the community, because the number of gems you have means that the number of rep points you give are kind of higher. So say you have 8 gems, every time I rep someone, I will give them 8 points, compared to when somebody with 1 gem would rep somebody and they'd give them 1 point. So if you have, for example, 12 gems, which is the top, they will rep them and they get 12 gems, and like, wow, I got repped by a 12 gemmer, like that's a big deal. And it builds up your rep points more quickly. So, you know, if really ingrained members of the community who've already established themselves as helpful are repping you, then it means that your answers are helpful as well, and it builds up that sense of real community, and people want to get rep, but they're not allowed to ask for it on the community either. So we do take down any posts that ask for it, so it has to be done through just by being helpful or informative or funny or whatever it is. And there is, at the end, there is a member of the community who was one of the first to get 12 gems, and every time that another person gets 12 gems, they create a thread for them, a discussion celebrating them and introducing them to 12 Gem Mountain, it's called, and they tag everybody else in who has 12 gems, and everybody celebrates that person, says congratulations, well done. It's really lovely.
So really basic, it's not prizes necessarily, it's points, it's stuff that doesn't really matter, but it does matter to the community in particular. I guess it's, you know, like Instagram, who cares about likes? Everybody. Okay, we are running out of time. I'm going to move through the next few slides quite quickly so we can get to your questions, and those of you can stay, fantastic. If not, this is all being recorded so you can watch later. So just kind of adding on to kind of the providing value exchange and also reinforcing that common purpose. We'll just kind of touch on these bits. If I'm actually just going to talk about this really briefly and then move on to the next slide, which I think is probably a bit more important. So certainly social listening is really, really important. So the more that you understand about your audience, what they're talking about, kind of their sentiment across many different platforms, the more that you can provide them what they want and what they're looking for. And as part of that closing feedback loop, so certainly where you're kind of hearing through that social listening or through your communication with students, what they or your audience, your community, they may not be students, you know, closing those feedback loops to say, okay, yeah, we listened to you, we heard you, like, what about this? Here it is. You told us that you wanted more information about blah, blah, blah. Here's some content for you. And then as part of that, also just really knowing that community and understanding who the influencers are in that online community. There are going to be people who are bigger, louder, more influential. Again, just knowing who they are, you can leverage them in different ways that you don't have to, but it's really good, again, to know who they are and just to make sure that, that again, like, you're listening to them really closely. Because there are lots of lurkers, not everyone talks loads, and those that do talk loads, those that are really active, you know, like verbally online, are really powerful. Okay, so the next slide I think is really important, and I'll hand over to Grace about this one.
Yeah, so with your community, you want to feel like you're part of the club. So you want to feel like you're involved, you understand, you feel like it's an exclusive club, a feeling of exclusivity, but you're actually very inclusive. You don't want to exclude anyone, but you want to create that feeling of, hey, I'm part of this, it's community, it's mine. Other people may not understand my community, but they're my community, and everyone has that in different ways, different forms. But by having that, it kind of really brings that personal benefit to that student or that member of the community. They feel accepted, they feel included, they feel like they can be themselves, and that's really important. And so how do you get that feeling? And it's all about communication, as we've mentioned before. How are you speaking with them? What is it that you are offering them? The value exchange comes into this, and how do you talk with them? And as we mentioned earlier about the idiosyncrasies, PRSOM and BREAD, using different acronyms, kind of getting that feeling of like you're part of the club, you understand what we're talking about, you understand our language, you're welcome, but making sure that language isn't inaccessible so people completely have no idea and it's really difficult to understand what you're talking about. Memes as well, just making it funny, making it light. People love that, understanding that meme, knowing what that means, because it's specific about your community and about how your community acts. Really important. The influences are really key. A lot of our kind of key influences are part of our volunteer team, and we communicate with them really closely, and we understand what it is. They know the community better than we do sometimes, because they're really active within it. And that means that we can understand the sense of the community, the feeling within the community, without necessarily even being online that day. I can get a message from a volunteer and feel that, and that constant reminder that you belong there.
Awesome. We're running out of time. We're going to try and get through the rest really quickly and get to a question. So key takeaways, I'll just run through these quickly if that's okay. So first off, just really consider the value exchanges in varying ways. So just giving your community opportunities to be seen and heard is absolutely invaluable, and that doesn't have to be monetary, it doesn't have to cost a lot, and doesn't have to take a lot of time, but that is totally essential. Creating that feeling of exclusivity, but the experience of belonging and inclusivity is really key, and that's obviously just what Grace has talked about. It seems like like it's not possible, but it absolutely is, and I think every community online has that about it. Understanding the idiosyncratic nuances of the communication between your community. Again, we've talked about this before. I want to reinforce it now. It's really important to understand how they communicate, and then finally, so as part of understanding that communication and those patterns, just looking out for influencers, understanding how they communicate and how they influence, whether it's just about proliferation because they're present or they're always there, they're always communicating, always talking, or whether it's something else that they have in their power, just making sure that you understand where that is and leverage that where possible. And then finally, we're just going through kind of like the final key takeaways, just wrapping everything up that we've talked about now into. So first off, a community is a group of people who share not only a common interest, but a common aspiration. Really important that ultimately all the people in your community are trying to improve themselves or something about their life or the lives of the people they care about. To create a buzzing and humming community requires you to recognize that it's a real ecosystem. It requires lots of elements to work, and all those elements have to be kind of in tune and humming and moving as you move forwards. Just nurture all parts of it. Also really understand the motivations of the people in the community, why they're there, what they get from it, and what they can offer others, how they communicate with one another. Just a couple more. So also just being aware of the risks. We went through this. I think it's really, really important. It was, Grace's example was exactly what you'll be experiencing in different places, not just in the student room, but of course elsewhere. And the kind of final point here is just right. Communication has to be authentic, and it has to be human. You have to have humanity with it. It's not robots communicating with students in these communities. It is you. It's people. So bring that human element, and that will carry you a long way. So I've zipped through that really, really quickly. And I'm just going to go to your questions now. So thank you so much for your questions. I think we've probably got time for just a couple, and I'm just going to pose them to you, Grace, if that's okay. So. There's a question from Lillian that says, how can I start engagement on the TSL platform? We have a platform for students joining our university in September, and there hasn't been any engagement. What are some of the recommendations you suggest to spark a conversation for new students joining university in September?
So what I'd initially do is kind of poll them. So that's something that we do on the student room quite a lot. It's a way of engaging with them without them having to actually write something, which is scary for a lot of people. Initially you don't want to be the first person to start that conversation. That's something that can be really worrying for a lot of new students. So polling is a great way to do it. It depends on the way that you want to do it or what your platform that you're using allows. But asking a question, getting some responses, some feedback, and then tailoring your content to that feedback is really important. We're constantly polling the community members, getting their feedback, understanding what it is that they're looking for, providing that content, and then we also engage with it as well. So as members of the community team, you don't want to be the one that's just posting things and not actually responding to anyone, getting involved in the conversation. So even if you all just have individual accounts as a kind of like members of your community, like we all do on the student room, we then come in and we respond to things and go, oh, that looks really interesting, what about that? And then that can spark conversations. Sometimes it's just somebody offering up an opinion, offering up something that they noticed from that poll, like, oh, that's really interesting. It's just about sparking conversation. Sometimes you might have to have conversations with yourself, but it's just about making sure that you are not the first person, they are not the first person to post, so there's stuff already there for them to get involved with. Showing that there is active as well, so even if you're just talking to yourselves, that you are being active within that community and that there is always someone there to respond to them, because quite a lot of the time they worry that they might not get a response, might be sitting there for ages, and nobody wants that. And just making sure that you are constantly just seeing what your community is feeling, understanding how their pain points and pressures. And it might just be like using things that are going on in the news, things that are going on today. It might not even have to be about that community, just being like, you're new students, what about this? It could be just like asking a question about something more generally. There's lots of different options that you can take with it.
Awesome. I think, just to kind of reinforce some of the bits that Grace was saying, just being really present. If that question was really about the student room itself as a platform, then just spending lots of time in other places as well, and being a part of the community, not just being a kind of a receiver, but being a progenitor of content, being a progenitor of also engaging in other places that students are spending time and the things they care about, whether that's applying to university or the specific course areas that are of interest to them. So then the next question, I think this is thinking about time. Thank you so much for everyone that's staying and listening. There's still almost 40 of you, so thank you very much for that. We'll just finish with one question, which is from Lucy. I think this is a really, really interesting question. Maybe something that we actually do this, I think, very, very well. But the question is, what methods of community feedback do you find successful? We've tried using Google Forms as a survey tool to get students to respond to our new virtual global lounge and have had low engagement.
Yeah, so it's difficult. Sometimes the way that you pose questions and the way that things are asked can massively impact on the engagement that you're going to get from it. And it might just be that you need to kind of show people that it's there, firstly. Ask them if it's the right way of communicating with them. Was it the right question? How can we make it better? What is it that you actually want to know? Things like that. And then closing that feedback loop by them providing them with the content that they need after that. So one thing with forms is that whenever we have a poll, for example, which is similar to kind of like a survey, but just a short version of that, something that's easy to do, that's really key as well. It needs to be really easy, not too long for things like this. You can do several forms, but if they're quick and just ask like one or two questions, you'll probably get higher engagement. But putting that in front of their faces, quite often people don't see it, or they're like, oh, it's effort for me to scroll all the way back up to the top to find it, even though it's not. So we tend to find everybody within the thread, for example, that we were looking at and thinking, oh, maybe they'd be interested. So an applicant thread, for example, we would then take down all the usernames of people that had responded in that thread, and then we would then tag them in and say, hey, I saw you guys were talking about this or something similar within this thread. I hope you don't mind, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this. I think actually it might be really useful for you. If you filled this out, you're helping to support our X, Y, and Z, that really actually has tangible benefits for you. And just letting them know that it's there and providing that link to them there. It's really about putting something in front of their face, and if it's not picking up after you put it in front of their face very visibly, it's about wording things, cutting down on questions, and that's kind of where
I think that's the point I was going to kind of pick up on here. So I think so first off, with any survey, you know, some people are just lovely and happy to do surveys. I like doing a survey, because I think because we work with them and I know how important they are. I'm always happy to do them because I know the value elsewhere. So one of the things is, I think, making sure that it's really clear the value, the benefit to that person, the benefit to that student about responding to you about it. So there's that. I think the other point is, you mentioned using Google Forms. I think the platform itself doesn't really matter. It's more about maybe thinking about, again, like the way that it's being delivered, not the platform, but how. So is one survey, one time, or during one time frame going to give you the most value, or actually is it really good to have like daily feedback, and also kind of in terms of that feedback, what's going to be most important for you. So one thing that we do on the student room is have kind of a bit of a constant NPS score. So if anyone uses Hotjar, it's just a really easy plugin, and it can just show up on on whatever page that's going to be useful for you. It's just at the bottom of the screen, and it just says, Are you enjoying this? And it asks them to give it a rating out of 10. And then regardless of how they've rated it, encourage them to give some more feedback and some more commentary. So maybe you've got some specific questions and need a survey. What I would maybe suggest you do is like maybe think about, okay, so do we have to have all these questions, or actually is it really important just to know, okay, so would students recommend it? Are they, out of 10, how much are they enjoying it? And actually what more do they want? And maybe that's the kind of, there's just almost like stripping it back, understanding the bare basics. And if you have the time, if you have the capacity to do some qual analysis, then fantastic. I'm wondering also whether, Lucy, maybe we can pick up separately. So your question is about, in terms of Google Forms, I can't work out whether it's the Google Forms that has low engagement or whether it's the virtual global lounge itself that has low engagement. And maybe like I will see if I can get your email address and message you about that. Although actually my email address is here. Please feel welcome to email me and we can have a chat about that as well. I think, we are very lucky to get a lot of feedback constantly from our audience. We have the polls on the site, which is just, it's a one question. They just click a button, they're in and they're out, easy peasy. And that makes it really accessible. So the more accessible in places that they spend time, the better. At that point, we are 11 minutes over. I'm so sorry. I think this is just such a big, rich topic. And I hope you've also all had an awful lot to learn from Grace. I certainly have in the process of doing this with you. So Grace, thank you so much for joining us. For the 27 of you that stayed right to the end, I'm so grateful. Thank you very much for coming. I really hope you've had a lot out of it. We do have some more coming up. So those of you that are working in universities that are looking for really high tier students, the next session is going to be all about recruiting high achieving students. So please come to that. There are more along the way and we hope to see you there. Have a great day. Thank you so much and goodbye.